Precision maintains continuity. There are no spikes, no collapses, only consistent execution at a defined standard. This continuity stabilizes output. What you do today aligns with what you did yesterday and what you will do tomorrow. There is no reset, only continuation. Consider the operational difference. With intensity, you rely on moments of high energy to compensate for periods of neglect. With precision, there are no periods of neglect. The system does not require compensation because it does not degrade. This is not restrictive. It is stabilizing. When actions are defined and executed consistently, decision fatigue decreases. You do not reconsider the same task repeatedly. You do not negotiate with yourself. The decision has already been made. Execution follows. Most inefficiency is not caused by lack of ability. It is caused by repeated decision-making on resolved matters. You revisit what should be fixed. You reconsider what should be defined. This consumes time and reduces clarity. Precision eliminates this loop. Once a standard is set, it is applied without variation. This removes the need for reinterpretation. It creates operational simplicity. Not through reduction of tasks, but through reduction of uncertainty. Uncertainty is the primary source of drift. When standards are unclear, execution varies. When execution varies, results are inconsistent. When results are inconsistent, correction becomes reactive. The system loses coherence. Repetition of exact standards restores coherence. Each action aligns with a defined requirement. Each outcome reinforces the structure. Over time, this alignment becomes automatic. Not because it is easy, but because it is repeated. There is no requirement to expand beyond capacity. There is only the requirement to maintain exactness within current capacity. Expansion without precision leads to collapse. Precision within limits leads to stability, and stability allows controlled expansion. You do not build order by doing more. You build order by doing what is required without deviation. When this is repeated, the system strengthens. When the system strengthens, capacity increases naturally. This is the discipline, not to chase progress, but to eliminate disorder. Not to seek intensity, but to enforce precision. Not to rely on motivation, but to maintain standard. What is repeated becomes structure. What becomes structure determines outcome. You do not lose your life in a single collapse. You lose it in small, tolerated imprecision. Not once, but daily. Order is not something you discover later. It is something you enforce now, through exactness in what you do, how you think, and what you allow. The mind does not drift into chaos by accident, it is trained there through neglect of detail. Each overlooked action, each delayed correction, each careless decision builds a structure, not of strength, but of disorder. Precision is not obsession. It is discipline applied at the smallest scale. When your actions become exact, your direction becomes stable. When your direction is stable, your life gains structure. Long-term order is never built in the future. It is constructed in the present, through repeated, controlled execution of what must be done, without deviation, without excuse. Everything begins with what you permit to pass uncorrected. Disorder is not an event. It is a pattern of tolerated deviation. A missed detail here, a delayed action there, a small compromise justified in the moment, these are not isolated incidents. They are signals. And when repeated, they become structure. Stoic discipline does not operate at the level of grand decisions. It operates at the level of execution. What you do repeatedly defines what you become structurally. Not what you intend. Not what you feel. Only what you execute with consistency. The mind seeks ease. It prefers approximation over precision, delay over immediacy, comfort over correction. Left unchecked, it will lower standards gradually until disorder feels normal. This is how deterioration hides, inside acceptable margins. Nothing appears broken. Yet nothing is exact. Precision interrupts this process. It forces alignment between action and standard. It removes the space where excuses grow. When something is required, it is done completely. When a deviation appears, it is corrected immediately. No accumulation. No delay. This is not intensity. Intensity is unstable. It surges, then collapses. Precision does not rely on energy. It relies on structure. A precise action today is not dependent on how you feel. It is executed because it is required. Consider the difference. Intensity attempts to overwhelm resistance through force. Precision eliminates resistance through clarity. There is no debate when the standard is exact. There is only execution. Daily life provides constant tests. You wake at a defined time or you negotiate with yourself. You complete a task fully or you leave fragments. You maintain order in your environment or you allow gradual decline. Each choice appears small. Each choice reinforces a pattern. When precision is absent, the system weakens. Tasks expand beyond their boundaries. Time becomes unstructured. Decisions become reactive instead of deliberate. The result is not immediate collapse. It is slow drift. And drift is difficult to detect because it feels gradual. But structure does not emerge from correction at the end. It is built during execution. A task done precisely does not require revisiting. A decision made clearly does not require reconsideration. Precision reduces friction over time because it eliminates the need for repair. Repetition is the mechanism. Not repetition of effort, but repetition of exactness. The same standard applied without variation. The same level of completion maintained regardless of circumstance. Over time, this repetition stabilizes behavior. What was once effort becomes default. There is no requirement for motivation in this process. Motivation is unreliable. It fluctuates. Precision does not depend on it. The standard exists independent of your state. Whether you feel resistance or not is irrelevant. The action remains unchanged. This is where most fail. They attempt to act when conditions are favorable. They wait for clarity, for energy, for readiness. But discipline is not conditional. It is enforced. If execution depends on internal state, then execution is unstable. Precision removes this dependency. It replaces decision with protocol. When something is defined, it is executed in the same manner every time. There is no reinterpretation. No adjustment based on mood. This creates consistency, and consistency creates order. The accumulation of precise actions forms a stable structure. Not visible at first. But over time, unmistakable. Tasks are completed without backlog. Decisions are made without hesitation. Time is used without waste. The system holds because each component is exact. There is no need for dramatic change. No need for radical overhaul. Order is not created through sudden transformation. It is built through controlled repetition of correct action. Small, exact, repeated. What appears insignificant in isolation becomes decisive in accumulation. One precise action does not define you. But repeated without deviation, it defines your structure. And structure determines outcome. You do not rise to a higher level of order. You fall to the level of your maintained standard. What is not enforced daily does not exist structurally. It exists only as intention, and intention has no weight in execution. Stoic discipline is not concerned with what you plan to do. It is concerned with what you fail to allow deviation in. The boundary you enforce defines the system you live within. If the boundary is loose, the system is unstable. If the boundary is exact, the system holds. Deviation always begins as something small. A slight delay justified as harmless. A reduced level of completion accepted as sufficient. A standard interpreted instead of followed. Each instance appears manageable. None appear decisive. But repetition converts permission into pattern. This is the critical error, treating small deviations as isolated. They are not isolated. They are cumulative permissions. And once permission is granted repeatedly, correction becomes resistance. What was once easy to fix becomes difficult because it has been normalized. Precision prevents normalization of error. It removes tolerance for partial execution. A task is either complete or it is not. There is no middle state. There is no partial credit in structure. Anything incomplete remains open, and what remains open accumulates pressure. Pressure is not always visible. It builds in backlog, in delayed decisions, in unresolved actions. Over time, this pressure reduces clarity. You begin to operate reactively, addressing what demands attention rather than what requires execution. The system shifts from controlled to responsive. Repetition of precision prevents this shift. Each completed action closes a loop. Each exact execution removes future burden. The result is not increased effort, but reduced friction. Fewer loose ends. Fewer decisions revisited. Fewer corrections required. This is how order compounds. Not through expansion, but through elimination of error. Every precise action removes the need for future repair. Over time, this creates space. Space for clarity, for deliberate action, for stability. Intensity does not produce this effect. Intensity creates spikes of performance followed by gaps. During the spike, much is done. During the gap, much is undone. The net result is inconsistency. And inconsistency cannot produce order. What breaks most systems is not difficulty. It is inconsistency in enforcement. The standard exists, but it is not applied uniformly. In some moments, it is followed. In others, it is relaxed. This variation introduces instability, and instability compounds faster than effort can compensate. Stoic discipline does not allow selective application. A standard that is applied only when convenient is not a standard. It is a preference. And preferences do not produce structure. The critical point is this: precision must be maintained at the point of friction. Not after. Not when it is easy. Exactly when resistance appears. Because resistance is where deviation attempts to enter. The mind will always present alternatives in these moments. Delay. Reduce. Postpone. Adjust. It will offer reasons that appear rational. It will suggest that a small deviation will not matter. And in isolation, it may not. But structure is not built on isolated instances. It is built on repeated behavior. Every time you accept a reduced standard under pressure, you reinforce the pathway of deviation. You teach the system that under difficulty, precision is optional. And once that rule is established, it will be applied again. This is how inconsistency becomes embedded. Not through failure, but through conditional execution. You act precisely when it is easy, and approximately when it is not. The result is fragmentation. Some parts of your system hold. Others degrade. Fragmentation is dangerous because it creates the illusion of control. You see areas where you perform well, and you assume the system is stable. But stability requires uniformity. A chain does not hold based on its strongest links. It holds based on its weakest. Precision removes this fragmentation by enforcing sameness across conditions. The action does not change based on difficulty. The environment does not dictate the standard. The standard dictates the action. This is where repetition becomes critical. Not repetition in ideal conditions, but repetition across variable conditions. The same execution when tired. The same execution when distracted. The same execution when there is no immediate consequence. Because long-term order is not built in moments of visibility. It is built in moments where deviation could pass unnoticed. When no one is observing. When there is no external pressure. When the only enforcement is internal. If precision exists only under observation, then the system is externally dependent. Remove the observer, and the structure weakens. But if precision is internalized, the system holds regardless of circumstance. Internalization does not occur through understanding. It occurs through repetition. The same action, executed the same way, enough times that deviation feels incorrect. Not morally, but structurally. At that point, discipline is no longer a decision. It is the default state. You do not choose to act precisely. You act precisely because any alternative is inconsistent with the system you have built. This is the transition from effort to structure. In the beginning, precision requires conscious enforcement. You must monitor, correct, and adjust continuously. It feels deliberate, controlled, sometimes restrictive. But with repetition, the requirement for conscious control decreases. Not because the standard lowers, but because it stabilizes. Execution becomes automatic, not in the sense of careless repetition, but in the sense of reliable consistency. There is no internal negotiation, no reconsideration. The action is executed because it aligns with the established pattern. This reduces cognitive load and increases stability. However, this state is fragile if not maintained. Precision is not permanent. It is sustained. The moment enforcement weakens, deviation re-enters. And because the system has expanded, the impact of deviation is greater. This is why discipline does not end. It is not a phase. It is a continuous process of maintaining exactness. Not increasing intensity, but preserving consistency. The objective is not perfection. It is uniformity. The same standard, applied without variation, over time. Uniformity creates predictability. Predictability creates stability. Stability creates order. And order, once established through repetition, does not require force to maintain. It requires only that you do not allow deviation to take root again. What appears stable can degrade silently if precision is not continuously enforced. Order does not collapse immediately. It erodes. Gradually, then structurally. The danger is not visible failure. It is unnoticed decline. This decline begins when standards are assumed rather than verified. You believe the system holds because it has held before. You assume consistency because you have established it once. But discipline does not persist on assumption. It persists on enforcement. Stoic discipline requires active maintenance. Not expansion, not escalation, maintenance. The same standards, checked and executed repeatedly. Without this, drift begins at the edges. Small inconsistencies appear. Minor delays return. Slight reductions in completion are tolerated. At first, these deviations seem insignificant. They do not disrupt the system immediately. But they introduce variation. And variation, when repeated, weakens structure. What was once exact becomes approximate. What was once immediate becomes delayed. The system does not break at once. It bends. And once bending is accepted, further deviation becomes easier. The threshold lowers. What was previously unacceptable becomes manageable. What was manageable becomes normal. This is the mechanism of regression. Not failure, but gradual redefinition of acceptable standards. Precision prevents this redefinition by maintaining fixed boundaries. A task is completed at the same level every time. A decision is executed without delay every time. There is no reinterpretation based on convenience. Convenience is the primary threat to order. It introduces flexibility where there should be none. It suggests that a reduced standard is acceptable under certain conditions. But conditions are always variable. If the standard changes with conditions, then the system has no stability. A stable system does not adapt its standards. It adapts its effort to meet the standard. The requirement remains fixed. Execution adjusts to fulfill it. Not the reverse. This is where many systems fail. They attempt to preserve comfort while maintaining order. This is incompatible. Order requires constraint. Constraint requires consistency. Comfort prefers variation. When comfort is prioritized, precision is reduced. When precision is reduced, order weakens. The sequence is predictable. Maintenance of precision requires recognition of early deviation. Not after accumulation. At the first instance. Immediate correction. No tolerance for drift. Delay in correction allows deviation to establish itself. Once established, it requires greater effort to remove. Early correction is efficient. Late correction is costly. This is not about rigidity. It is about structural integrity. A structure that allows small cracks to remain will eventually fail under pressure. A structure that corrects immediately maintains strength. Daily execution is the inspection process. Each action is an opportunity to verify alignment with the standard. Not occasionally. Continuously. There is no passive state in discipline. Either the system is being maintained, or it is degrading. There is no neutral position. This requires attention, not intensity. Attention to detail. Attention to completion. Attention to timing. Not excessive, but exact. The objective is not to increase effort. It is to eliminate variation. When variation is removed, execution becomes predictable. When execution is predictable, outcomes stabilize. Stability reduces the need for correction. Less correction reduces complexity. Reduced complexity increases clarity. This is how precision simplifies, rather than restricts. However, this simplicity depends on sustained enforcement. Once enforcement stops, complexity returns. Decisions multiply. Tasks remain open. Time fragments. This return is often subtle. It does not announce itself. It appears as minor inconvenience. Slight disorganization. Small inefficiencies. But these are indicators. Not isolated issues, but signs of structural weakening. Ignoring these signs allows regression to continue. Addressing them immediately restores alignment. The system you maintain is the system you live within. If you maintain precision, you live within order. If you allow deviation, you live within instability. There is no separation between action and environment. Your repeated behavior defines both. Precision is not a one-time correction. It is continuous alignment. Maintained daily. Without exception, the final failure point is not lack of knowledge. It is the refusal to apply what is already defined. You know the standard. You know the requirement. The gap is not understanding. The gap is execution without deviation. At this stage, the problem is no longer external. It is internal resistance to sustained precision. Not dramatic resistance. Subtle resistance. The inclination to relax once stability is achieved. The assumption that structure, once built, will maintain itself. It will not. Order is not self-sustaining. It is self-reinforcing only under continued enforcement. Remove enforcement, and the system reverts. Not immediately, but inevitably. This is where discipline is tested at its highest level. Not in building order, but in maintaining it without decline. Because once the system functions, the urgency disappears. There is no visible pressure. No immediate consequence for small deviations. This creates a false sense of security. You begin to believe that the system is resilient enough to absorb minor inconsistencies. That a small delay will not matter. That a reduced standard, applied occasionally, will not affect the whole. But the system does not evaluate intent. It responds to input. If the input changes, the system changes. Even slightly. A single deviation does not collapse the structure. But it alters the pattern. And patterns, once altered, tend to repeat. Not because they are necessary, but because they have been permitted. This is the critical distinction. What is permitted becomes possible. What becomes possible becomes repeatable. What is repeatable becomes structural. At this level, precision is no longer about correction. It is about protection. Protecting the integrity of what has been built. Protecting the consistency that sustains it. Protection requires vigilance. Not intensity. Not constant force. But continuous awareness of deviation at the point of entry. The moment a standard is lowered, it must be recognized. Not justified. Not ignored. Recognized and corrected immediately. Without negotiation. Negotiation is the entry point of decline. It introduces subjectivity into a system that requires objectivity. It allows temporary states, fatigue, distraction, convenience, to influence fixed standards. Once this occurs, the system is no longer stable. It becomes conditional. And conditional systems are inherently unstable. A precise system does not negotiate. It executes. The condition does not determine the action. The standard does. This requires separation between internal state and external behavior. You may feel resistance. You may lack energy. You may prefer delay. None of these alter the requirement. Execution proceeds regardless. This is not suppression. It is alignment. Aligning behavior with defined standards, independent of internal fluctuation. Over time, this alignment strengthens the system further. Because it removes variability at the source. The internal state no longer influences execution. Execution becomes consistent across all states. This consistency creates resilience. Not resilience in the sense of absorbing disorder, but in preventing its formation. A system built on precision does not require recovery. It requires maintenance. There are no major failures to fix because minor deviations are never allowed to accumulate. This is the highest form of control. Not reactive correction, but proactive enforcement. Not managing consequences, but eliminating causes. At this level, discipline is quiet. There is no visible struggle. No dramatic effort. Only consistent, exact execution. What you do appears simple. Repetitive. Unremarkable. But the result is stability that does not break under pressure. Because pressure does not introduce new variables. It only reveals existing ones. And if the system is built on precision, there are no weak points to expose. This is how long-term order is secured. Not through strength, but through consistency. Not through intensity, but through repetition of exact standards. There is no final stage where discipline is no longer required. There is only continued enforcement at the same level of precision that built the system. What you maintain determines what remains. Long-term order is not an outcome you reach. It is a condition you maintain. It does not arrive through effort accumulated in moments of intensity, but through the consistent application of precision across time. Nothing in your system holds unless it is enforced. Nothing remains exact unless it is repeated without deviation. What you allow, even once, begins to define what is acceptable. What becomes acceptable becomes standard. And what becomes standard determines the structure you live within. There is no separation between small actions and large outcomes. The system does not distinguish between them. It responds only to what is repeated. Each precise execution strengthens alignment. Each tolerated deviation introduces instability. You do not need more complexity. You do not need more effort. You need exactness in what is already required. The same standard, applied without variation, regardless of condition. There is no final correction that secures order permanently. There is only continued enforcement. Daily. Without interruption. What you repeat, you become. What you maintain, remains. And what remains, defines your life.